Theodore McCarrick defrocked. The once powerful U.S. church leader is found guilty by the Vatican of sex abuse. We'll have the details from Rome ahead of this week's bishops' meeting. National emergency. Continued reaction from President Trump's Friday announcement. Special report.
I'm Mark Irons in Munich. We'll update you tonight about the issues facing Catholics in Germany.
And a trip back in time. A full house at George Washington's Mount Vernon on this President's Day. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, February 18th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Vatican defrocks former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick after finding him guilty of sexual abuse. The 88-year-old is the highest-ranking churchman to be dismissed from the clergy. McCarrick served as Archbishop in Washington, D.C. before his retirement. His appeal Friday was turned down by Pope Francis. He was once a prince of the church and a friend of presidents. Former Washington, D.C. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick enjoyed a spectacular career at the heart of power, in Washington and in Rome. When the U.S. Cardinals were summoned to the Vatican by John Paul II in 2002, at the beginning of the sex abuse scandal, Cardinal McCarrick was the reassuring face of that crisis, advocating zero tolerance for abusers, even as there were unrevealed allegations against him.
I can't see how anyone in the United States today would cover up something like that.
Theodore McCarrick was created a cardinal in 2001 by John Paul II. Around that time, an American priest wrote to the Vatican to warn them of rumors the cardinal was sexually abusing seminarians, but no action was taken for years until, according to the Vatican, under Benedict XVI. McCarrick was quietly advised not to travel or be seen in public and live a discreet life of prayer and penance to avoid further rumors of his sexual misconduct with seminarians, a recommendation which the cardinal seemed to ignore as he continued traveling and appearing in public, even at the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis. But then, in June last year, accusations McCarrick had abused a minor were found credible by an internal church investigation in New York. Although McCarrick maintained his innocence, he resigned as cardinal. Finally, he was brought to trial at the Vatican, though by now 88 years old, he did not attend in person. Phil Saviano was abused as a child and became central to the Boston Globe's investigation of pedophilia priests in the Boston area. He is praising the Vatican's decision, but remains cautious.
I'm hoping that this is not a situation where Pope Francis is throwing a bone to his dissenters in an attempt to quiet everybody down, and then McCarrick will be the one and only. Because there are certainly many others who have allegations against him who should face some accountability.
Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, what does this verdict mean for Theodore McCarrick?
Wyatt, to put it very concisely, it's no sacraments, no collar, and no title. He's no longer able to present himself as a priest, no longer able to celebrate Mass or impart the sacraments. And he's no longer even to hold the title of Father or Archbishop or Cardinal. He's down to Mr. McCarrick. He's still living in a monastery in the Diocese of Salina, Kansas. The local bishop issued a statement over the weekend saying he would stay there until a decision would be made for further lodging in another place. And this dates back, Wyatt, to more than 6 months ago when McCarrick was first credibly accused accusations against him were found to be credible by the Archdiocese of New York of him fondling a teenage boy.
So then, noting that, how do you think this decision will impact the summit, which is just upcoming?
Well, it's sure to impact it in some way, Wyatt. It's very clear from the timing that the Pope wanted this case to be resolved before the summit started. The issue is that it's not the only case. There are other cases coming up seemingly almost every day. Just over the weekend, another case came up of a priest from Trenton, New Jersey, who was on a list issued by the diocese of those credibly accused of abuses. The interim Holy See Press Office Director said today that priest is no longer working in the Vatican court that he was working in until now. The one thing that the McCarrick case does set on the table for bishops is that the Pope is very serious about seeing things through to the end, and for crimes that have been committed, he doesn't stop short even of reaching a guilty verdict and laicizing a former cardinal.
And some survivors are praising the Vatican for defrocking McCarrick, but critics say the question remains, what about church leaders who look the other way during all this?
Yes, this is a big question. You know, the Catholic Association issued a statement saying that this is only a first step to eradicating sexual abuse at all levels in the church, said that much more needs to be done to hold those who knew about McCarrick's activities and misconduct accountable. The Pope is actually dedicating one full day to accountability in this abuse summit that's coming up this week. That's in addition to responsibility and transparency. So they are looking specifically at accountability, and that's something that people are going to be paying a lot of attention to.
So many factors that they're considering as we approach the summit. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief, thanks very much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
One of the victims of defrocked ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick is expressing relief Pope Francis believes his accusations of years-long sex abuse. In a statement released by his lawyer Saturday, James Grine writes in part, "I am hopeful now I can pass through my anger for the last time. I hope that Cardinal McCarrick will no longer be able to use the power of Jesus' church to manipulate families and sexually abuse children." Grine, whose story I told you here on News Nightly in November, accused McCarrick of sexually abusing him for some 2 decades, starting when he was 11, including during confession. Stay with EWTN News Nightly as well as our partners at Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register for continuing coverage of Theodore McCarrick's defrocking. We'll have more analysis coming up later in the show. A White House advisor says President Donald Trump is prepared to issue his first veto if Congress votes to disapprove his declaration of a national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border. Conservative lawmakers say a veto would be safe from a congressional attempt to override it.
There's going to be resolutions in both the House and Senate to disapprove of what the president's doing. I think they'll pass, but when the president will veto them, I don't think there's any chance that the veto will be overridden. I think there are plenty of votes in the House to make sure that there's no override of the president's veto.
White House senior advisor Stephen Miller says the president has the authority granted by the National Emergencies Act, but by allocating money from other federal channels for border wall construction, the president will likely face legal challenges.
And in saying just the other day that he didn't really need to do this, he just wanted to do it because it would help things go faster, he's pretty much daring the court to strike this down.
Congressman Schiff calls this a moment of truth for his GOP colleagues. The White House says President Trump is on firm legal footing and his resolution will ultimately survive a fight in court. Catholic Florida Senator Marco Rubio visits a staging point for U.S. aid to Venezuela yesterday. He calls it a crime against humanity for soldiers loyal to President Maduro to block shipments.
Well, look, the aid is going to get through, and I think ultimately the question is whether it gets through in a way that he's cooperative with or in a way that he's not. But there's no way you're going to stand ultimately in the way of a people whose children are starving to death.
Addressing a migrant crowd in Colombia, Rubio said in Spanish, soldiers who keep aid shipments from entering Venezuela will spend the rest of their lives hiding from justice. Over the weekend, Vice President Mike Pence criticized European allies working to preserve a nuclear deal with Iran. White House correspondent Mark Irons asked if allies like Germany are considering leaving the agreement.
Well, we've had very frank discussions about the Iran nuclear deal, and here in Munich and in Poland. We called on our European allies to stop undermining U.S. sanctions. We'll continue to call on our European partners to stand with us, recognize that the greatest threat to peace and security in the Middle East is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
The vice president was speaking at a security conference in Munich. Staying in Germany, church leaders there are dealing with a small but vocal group of faithful calling for widespread changes. White House correspondent Mark Irons has this report.
Cardinal Rainer Volke, the Archbishop of Cologne, tells News Nightly abandoning Catholic Church beliefs is a very dangerous concept. He's reacting to an open letter signed earlier this month by 9 German Catholics, including 2 prominent Jesuit priests. The group is advocating for the priestly ordination of women, an end to clerical celibacy, and a reevaluation of the church teaching on homosexuality.
We are part of a great tradition. The church also stands for truths that transcend time. and it is not our task to now go and invent a new church by ourselves.
In a changing society, Cardinal Volke tells us the Church's challenge is to convey Christian teaching in a fresh way.
To witness and proclaim these timeless faiths now in such a way that it becomes understandable and comprehensible to the people of today.
And in Germany, conveying the gospel message means meeting the needs of a diverse, changing population. A few years ago, when refugees needed a place to go, German Chancellor Angela Merkel would not turn them away.
After more than 1 million immigrants flooded into Germany in 2015, the government has taken measures to restrict the flow of migrants. The Catholic Church has always stood in favor of welcoming the stranger.
The Church in Germany is also fighting for the life of unborn children. Abortion is illegal in the country and even considered a criminal offense. But it goes unpunished in certain circumstances. Some politicians want to lift a ban that keeps healthcare providers from advertising for abortions. Cardinal Volke pushes back.
That abortion is, of course, a criminal offense here in Germany. And it is absurd to claim that one should be allowed to advertise for criminal offense.
Volke believes public concern over abortion in Germany is waning. However, he is encouraged with the status of another pro-life issue.
Thank God, when it comes to euthanasia, asking for voluntary assisted suicide is not possible in Germany, as is now increasingly possible in the Netherlands and Belgium, as well as in Switzerland.
As for the challenging times the Church in Germany faces, Cardinal Volke says he's convinced the Holy Spirit and Word of God will be the guide. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Catholics in Nigeria gather in a prayer a day after elections in that country were postponed. The faithful say they are praying for peace and an end to the bloodshed in an area often attacked by the terrorist group Boko Haram. Nigeria's top candidates condemned the surprise last-minute decision. Elections are now expected to take place Saturday. Hundreds of boats operated by rowers in spectacular costumes led a colorful parade yesterday through the canals of Venice. Thousands of people from all over the world watched. In front was a gondola depicting a giant rat. The 10-year-old festival runs until early next month. It celebrates the days just before Lent. Coming up, a look at what's next for defrocked former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. And we'll tell you about the Prime Minister of Hungary's plan to encourage families to have more children. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Organizers of the Vatican Summit on Abuse released new details today. They say they're optimistic for what could come out of the meetings.
My hope would be that people see this as a turning point. It's not the end game. No one can ever say that there's never going to be abuse that happens in the world or in the church. But we're going to do everything possible to make sure that people are held responsible, accountable, and there's going to be transparency, because those three elements will keep children safe.
Cardinal Blaise Cupich, one of the 4 organizers for the summit, says participants will work to close whatever loopholes there are. The summit begins on Thursday. Francis Rocca, Vatican correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, joins us now from Rome. Frank, just because Cardinal McCarrick is defrocked doesn't mean this case is over. Now the major question is, who knew about this abuse and did nothing? Do you agree this is a turning point for the Vatican, as Cardinal Cupich said today?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose that depends on what people demand, but I think there are a lot of people who are wondering, how did he rise? How did now Mr. McCarrick rise in the pontificate of John Paul II to rise to such a height? And then what did Pope Francis know about this history of misconduct with adults? I mean, we know that he was put under some kind of disciplinary restrictions by Pope Benedict. Archbishop Vigano says he told the Pope about this. No one has denied that. So the question is, now that misconduct with adults has risen to the level of something that you can get laicized for, evidently, that's a pretty big issue and a pretty big question.
You've been covering the Vatican for almost 12 years. How significant is the Pope's decision to defrock a former cardinal?
Well, obviously it's colossal. I asked a church historian, and he said he couldn't think of a previous instance ever, and there may be one in the midst of time, lost in the midst of time. So obviously it's a very big deal. The question again is it an exception or is it a precedent? And you notice that Cardinal O'Malley, in his response, he said, okay, that's good, that helps to administer justice, but we really have to be committed to accountability of bishops and cardinals as a continuing policy.
Well, let me follow up with you on that, because Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, as you referenced, he won't be addressing the summit, and you wrote a piece about Pope Francis and Cardinal O'Malley clashing over the deal with the abuse crisis. Do you believe that Pope Francis has the appetite to take strong action?
Well, the lesson we can draw from the tension with Cardinal O'Malley is that he doesn't like the American way, and it's not very popular at the Vatican, and it's not popular in a lot of countries outside a relatively small group of mostly English-speaking countries, which is one strike you're out, mandatory reporting to civil authorities, publishing lists of credibly accused. That doesn't fly here. It never really was popular in the Vatican, and it's not evidently popular with this Pope. And as we know, he instituted an appeals body that reduced sentences of a number of abusers who had been defrocked, who had been laicized, and now they got short suspensions. That did not happen under the previous pontificate. That's not the way things were going. And now they've moved in another direction. And I think that's the conflict with Cardinal O'Malley epitomizes that.
Okay, well, we'll be watching to see what the Vatican's next steps are after this defrocking. Francis Rocca, Vatican correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Hungary's prime minister announces economic incentives, including lifetime income tax exemptions, to encourage the country's women to have more children. In his State of the Nation address last week, Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced the measures as Hungary's answer to its population decline, not immigration. Prime Minister Orban is proposing a lifetime personal income tax exemption for women who give birth to and raise at least 4 children. He's also offering financial grants for the purchase of a 7-seat vehicle for families with 3 or more children. And finally, housing subsidies for families with at least 2 children. Stephen Mosher, president of the Population Research Institute, joins me now via satellite from Naples, Florida. Stephen, welcome back. Can financial incentives lead to population growth? And if so, at the rates needed to really turn around a rapid decline?
Well, we'll see. I mean, we have every European country now for years, France and Germany and Austria and all the rest, have had pronatal policies in place hoping to boost the birth rate. No country, however, has gone as far as Prime Minister Orban has, not only in trying to provide transportation with the vehicle allowance, but also trying to provide housing with the low interest rate loan, and of course, sheltering young couples who are willing to be generous in having children from all income taxes. That's a big one. This goes a lot further than any other country, so we'll be watching very closely to see if Hungary, which has had a below replacement birth rate now for about a half a century, can raise its birth rate back up to replacement, which is 2 children per family. It's now down at about 1.3, and that's a recipe for economic and demographic decline over time.
Well, speaking of demographic decline, the Prime Minister Orban is known for his hardline anti-immigration stance. Is it realistic to think Hungary can replenish its population without immigration?
Well, they had a plan up until this year that didn't go as far as this one. So I think they're stepping it up. And I do think that Hungary, which became a Christian country in 1000 AD under the king, who is now Saint Stephen of Hungary, has its own unique culture, its own unique traditions and history. There are fewer than 10 million Hungarians in the world alive today. And I think they have a right to democratically decide to preserve that unique culture and history. Every Hungarian child speaks fluent Hungarian by age 4. Hungarian is a very difficult language to learn. It is almost unique among the world's languages, and it's hard to see how you can have large in-migration and assimilate those numbers into a very small Hungarian culture. So raising the birth rate is obviously the best way to go. We'll see if it works. I'm rooting for the Hungarians. I like them. If they don't raise their birth rate, they're going to disappear from the face of the earth. I, for one, will miss them.
Well, as you referenced before, Hungary is not the only country in Europe struggling with an aging population and a decline in the birth rate. Why do you think this is happening in general, and is there anything European governments can do to reverse the trend?
Well, there are three big factors here. One is urbanization. People living in crowded urban environments tend to have smaller families because it's quite simply not a family-friendly environment to live in a crowded urban setting, maybe in an apartment rather than a single-family dwelling. Modernization, the idea that everyone is exposed to radical ideas about individualism and indeed a lot of antenatal propaganda goes around. As you know, babies are viewed by Planned Parenthood, for example, as burdens rather than blessings, as the good book tells us they are. And then there's the factor that you now need to survive in many countries 2 incomes. So you have women joining the workforce in large numbers, and for many of them, you know, it's a choice between having children and joining the workforce. Governments need to be a lot more open to helping women who want to have children join the workforce and have children at the same time. And a lot of countries have failed in that respect as well. So urbanization, modernization, women joining the workforce in large numbers has driven the birth rate down in Europe to about 1.3 children. That's where the entire world is headed. By 2045, population of the world is going to peak, and then it's going to begin to decline. So I think Europe's present is the world's future. And we have to hope that Europe, maybe Hungary, maybe other countries will figure out how to reverse this decline, because otherwise our long-term problem is not going to be too many children. It's going to be too few children, too few people.
Okay, well, we'll be watching like you will to see if Hungary's plan works in the long run. Stephen Mosher, president of the Population Research Institute, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, we hear how a pro-life group is showing the movie Gosnell on nearly 100 college campuses. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A pro-life students group is sponsoring screenings of Gosnell, the trial of America's biggest serial killer, on more than 90 college campuses today. The movie depicts the true story of abortionist Kermit Gosnell. Gosnell was convicted in 2013 of first-degree murder in the deaths of 3 babies born alive at his Philadelphia clinic and involuntary manslaughter in the death of an adult patient. Reagan Barklage, Regional Director of Students for Life of America, joins us now via Skype from St. Louis. Reagan, welcome back. Kermit Gosnell's abortion clinic was raided 9 years ago today. As states like New York loosen abortion restrictions, why is it so important for young people now to see this movie?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so important that we're showing this film on almost 100 campuses today, at, like you said, on the anniversary of the FBI raid, because the abortion industry is targeting us, the millennials, and it's so important that us as Students for Life, that we're exposing the reality of legal abortion on campuses. And so we hope today that our peers see this film and they think twice about the abortion industry and, as it's classified as women's health.
President Trump met with pro-life advocates last week and held a conference call with thousands more. He's promised to veto any legislation that weakens existing federal protections of innocent life. What are you hoping to see from this administration?
We hope to see, obviously, the 20-week abortion ban would be awesome, as President Trump promised that he would sign that into law. But any sort of pro-life effort, we would be just excited and ecstatic about. We haven't seen much come out of Congress recently, and so we would just like to take advantage of this opportunity while we have President Trump in office.
Polls show the vast majority of Americans oppose third trimester abortions. What is Students for Life of America doing around the country to change state policies on this?
So 70% of millennials support restrictions on abortion, and many students that we encounter every day on campus are just shocked that abortion is legal up until the day of birth in our country. And so Students for Life, we're doing a variety of things to combat late-term abortion. Every day we're out on campus talking about the reality of abortion, but also we have our C4 into effect now. We just recently launched Students for Life Action, and as of every day as we've launched the C4, we've had to counter efforts put forth by the New York administration and in Virginia and Vermont So our students and our staff are out there combating this legislative effort to protect late-term abortion in those states.
Seems like it's just so important to get all the information out there so that students will be able to make the best decisions, as is everyone. Reagan Barklage, Western Regional Director for Students for Life of America, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Finally tonight, Americans are celebrating George Washington's birthday, which is observed the third Monday of February. It's also a national holiday, President's Day. Hundreds of visitors lined up outside of George Washington's Mount Vernon estate in Virginia this morning. It's the single busiest day of the year for organizers. The day included a presidential tribute at Washington's tomb, the official observance ceremony of Washington's birthday, and a special military demonstration. It was just 4 years ago I had the chance to speak to the actor who plays the first U.S. president, and he never broke character. How old are you going to be now?
Well, I'm well into my 60s, sir. How old are you?
Well, luckily I'm just 30, so I'm not quite there yet.
I have boots older than you.
Of course, George Washington having a little bit of fun with me. And he's, of course, not the only actor. Of course, Mount Vernon invites visitors to travel back to the 18th century to see what life was like. Mount Vernon is a beautiful place, by the way, if you haven't had the chance to see it for yourself. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.